There have been many more things that surprised me much more in my long history in sports than a Blue Jays victory would surprise me.
Blue Jays and the Dodgers squaring off in a series that we hope is as entertaining as the rest of this Major League Baseball postseason has been. It's been spectacular. So for more on that, let's welcome in one of the best to ever do it, Bob Costas, special contributor and commentator over at MLB Network and CNN. Kind enough to join us ahead of this. And Bob, looking at this matchup, I feel like a lot of people have dubbed this sort of a David versus Goliath, given what the Dodgers accomplished last year in the payroll. Is that fair? Is that disrespectful to this Blue Jays team that's pretty high in payroll? How do you hear that?
Yeah, it's disproportionate, and it's not fair to the Blue Jays. They have a very good team. Bo Bichette is apparently back, so that adds a bat to their lineup. Even if he's only 80% or so, he is going to play. At least that's what he and his manager, John Schneider, have said. So that's an important addition. My feeling is if they can get out of Toronto with a split, the odds are that they can win at least 1 out of 3. It's not like the Dodgers are playing the Rockies or the White Sox or somebody, or the Pirates without Paul Skeens on the mound. 1 out of 3 is reasonable. They get out of Toronto with a split, there's a pretty darn good chance that they're coming back to Toronto, even if they're down 3-2. They were down 3-2 at home for 6 and 7 against Seattle. Now, as good as the Mariners are, they're not as good and they're not as deep, especially in starting pitching, as the Dodgers are. And the Dodgers, who kind of slow walked through the season and won only 93, which is why they had only the 3rd best division winning record in the National League and had to dispense with the Reds in 2 quick games in the wild card round. But obviously, right now, the Dodgers are the best team in the game, not just the best of the 2 surviving teams. They're the best team in all of baseball once October rolled around, so they deserve to be favored. But are they prohibitive favorites? No. And historically, we can think of lots of World Series in which the underdog team won. 4-7 is a legitimate test, more so than 2 out of 3, obviously, or 3 out of 5. But as you guys know, if you played 4-7 in football, assuming that everybody could still be standing at the end of 7 football games. If you play 4-7 in football, the lesser team is not winning 4-7. They might win 1, right? They might pull 1 off, but they're not going to beat the best team in the league. But just think, just one example that pops in my head. 1990, the Oakland A's are in the middle of winning 3 pennants in a row. Now, Kirk Gibson and Orel Hershiser had pulled a miracle on them in 88. They did win the Earthquake Series in 89. In 90, they're overwhelming favorites against the Reds. Not only do the Reds win the series, they sweep them. They sweep them. The Miracle Mets beat Earl Weaver's Baltimore Orioles of Brooks Robinson, Frank Robinson, and that pitching staff with Jim Palmer and Dave McNally and 4 20-game winners one season, maybe not that season, beat them in 5 games in 1969. That's baseball. Now, if I had to bet my life, I'm betting on the Dodgers. But if you're going to tell me that the Blue Jays have no shot, I completely disagree with that.
Whenever there's a first in baseball, it's reason to stand and applaud because the game's been around so long. You mentioned Bo Bichette is back. He's going to play second base, hasn't played since September 6th. But between Bo Bichette, Dalton Varsho, and Vlad Guerrero Jr., it's the first time in the World Series history 3 sons of former players started for one team. I would imagine you covered their fathers when they played, didn't you?
Yes, I did, as a matter of fact. You guys would have a special affinity for that. Not only 2 Golics, but 2 Mike Golics, right? Uh-huh. The only thing that's bad, they're not playing in South Bend, I'm sorry to inform you. But apart from that, you guys should be really locked into this.
No, absolutely. We have forced almost contractually to bring up that stat going into this game. The other thing that has to get brought up for the Dodgers, you mentioned the way that they've clicked into form in this postseason. Can you remember a time in a postseason run we saw as dominant a pitching rotation, starting rotation, as we did in that last round from the Dodgers?
I'd have to search the memory bank. In terms of how they did, I can't think of any. In terms of what the quality of the staff was, I mentioned the Baltimore Orioles, who had Mike Cuellar, Dave McNally, Jim Palmer, the best of them, and one season Pat Dobson won 20. In 1971, they all won 20 or more. Of course, starting pitchers got more decisions then. They pitched more complete games. Bullpen usage was different. I can't, off the top of my head, After we're done, it's going to dawn on me what the better comp is. But I don't know that you could put anybody ahead of what the Dodgers starters are doing now. And I think that Dave Roberts, who's an excellent manager and bound for the Hall of Fame, I think he might have learned a bit of a lesson, if that's the right way to put it, in game one against the Brewers, where Snell had a one-hitter through 8 and had faced the minimum because he picked the one guy who hit a soft single, picked him off. He should have let Snell go out there and finish the game. Even though that's not the usual way you approach it in modern baseball, you got to look at every situation on its individual merits. And Snell was just cruising along. He had complete command. He hadn't thrown that many pitches, hadn't had any stressful innings, and the bullpen almost blew the game. Then the very next night, he lets Yamamoto complete the game. Now, Glasnow has no history, really, of going deep into games. So we pulled Glasnow, I think, after 6, but he had pitched really well. Maybe it was 7, at least 6. And with Ohtani, you don't want to push him any further. And you had to leave him to hit 2 more home runs. So he went 6 and struck out 10 and allowed only 2 hits. So if you're looking at those 4 performances in succession in a postseason series, I can't think of anything better than that.
So let's narrow it down to one performance, and you have such a keen eye on the history of the game. That game 4, 5-1 win for the Dodgers, where Shohei has 10 strikeouts, 3 for 3 with 3 home runs. Mm-hmm. Is there a better performance than that one?
No, there's not a better combined performance than that. I've had to think about it. You know, Bob Gibson in Game 7 in 1967 for the Cardinals at Fenway Park pitched a complete game. It wasn't a shutout. He also hit a home run in the game because he's a good hitting pitcher. Hit a home run the next year in the World Series against the Tigers. He had 3 complete game wins in that World Series. So but there's no direct comp to what Ohtani has done. Babe Ruth was a pitching hero in the teens. We're talking about more than 100 years ago. He had a streak in the World Series of 29 consecutive scoreless innings. But he never pitched at that level again and he hardly pitched at all, once he became a slugging outfielder. Reggie Jackson had 3 home runs in a World Series game, and it was a deciding game, but he didn't pitch. Don Larson pitched a perfect game in the World Series, but he didn't hit a home run. Albert Pujols had 5 hits, went 5 for 6 in 2011 for the Cardinals against the Rangers, and 3 of the 5 hits were homers. Albert Pujols, one of the best hitters of all time. But if memory serves, he didn't pitch in that game. We throw around the word unique too liberally when we really mean pretty rare. But Ohtani is completely unique. He really is a unicorn. There's no comp before, and I don't think there'll be another comp that really at all for Ohtani anytime in our lifetime.
Yeah, it certainly feels like we are in the midst of something, like you said, truly unique and unprecedented on that side.
Yeah.
I do want to talk a bit about the Blue Jays on the other side. While he's not Shohei Ohtani, Vlad Guerrero Jr. has been their $500 million man and has looked every bit like it during this postseason run. How has he even maybe elevated his game since receiving that major vote of confidence from the franchise?
Yeah, he really has. And if it were not for Ohtani, a lot of the speculation and a lot of the headlines in this postseason would be going to Vlad Guerrero. He is on an absolute rampage these days. With Bichette back in the lineup, I don't know exactly what the lineup is tonight and who's hitting where, but with Bichette back in the lineup, he gets a little bit more protection, I would assume. It'll be harder to pitch around him. The Brewers were a very admirable team, but they weren't a slugging team by and large. They had to get on base. They had to take the extra base, steal a base, do those little things. But they didn't pose that many threats where if you made a mistake, you're likely to find the ball on the other side of the fence. The Blue Jays have more guys who can hurt you that way.
Another great story with the Blue Jays is their pitcher, Trey Savage. I mean, the timeline
right.
of this guy at 22
Insane.
years old, I mentioned it earlier, April 8th, he made his first career single A start and then went through high A, double A, triple A to the point now where he's making his first World Series start. How impressive is that at 22?
It's not just impressive. It's almost hard to believe. It's almost like something out of a novel or a crazy baseball movie where somebody comes from out of nowhere. And the thing about him is when you see him interviewed, he seems very, very poised, very mature, not overwhelmed by the moment. Now, the World Series is one step up and it's a brighter spotlight. And there are several days between the end of the LCS and the start of the World Series for speculation to set in and for him to think about all this. And it is the Dodgers. We talk about their pitching, but think about their lineup. There's not many weak spots in that lineup. Almost everybody in that lineup can do damage. So it's a daunting task, but he doesn't look to me from a distance like somebody who's going to crumble under the pressure. He seems to be uncommonly poised for someone of his age.
Well, he's got good role models in that locker room. I mean, you want to talk about postseason poise, what George Springer has been able to continue to do in his postseason career. You mentioned baseball is a sport full of long slumps, full of ways that sometimes your best players don't always get to impact it. How has he been able to so consistently and kind of reverse back the clock to some of that success we saw in Houston for so many years?
Yeah, when he got hit on the knee and the way he went down writhing in pain, you would have thought, well, there's no way he's coming back unless they make it to the World Series. There's no way he's going to play against the Mariners in the rest of this series. And not only does he do it, he hits the series deciding home run. You want to talk about not being overwhelmed by the moment? He has such an excellent history throughout his career with the Astros that he's one of the old heads in that clubhouse. Yeah. He's one of the people who's experienced it and knows how to deal with it.
Yeah, it really, really does. Do you think that what the Dodgers did will be done by other high-paying teams to where they can get players? Now, Shohei's deal is so crazy with the deferral, but that they could pay players a high amount and defer a high amount?
I think in the upcoming collective bargaining agreement, whether it results in a lockout or a strike, and hopefully we avoid both, there may be some provision about deferred payments, which is not the same thing as a salary cap. There's already baseball's version of, if not a cap, which the other team sports have in one way or another, but the luxury tax is supposed to be a drag on salaries. But if you're playing kind of hedge fund baseball, as Brian Kenny puts it, on the Major League Baseball Network, which is what the Dodgers are doing, and you got the Gutenberg thing behind them, if you're allowed to defer payments, some people are speculating they've already made the investment back or will shortly because they're only paying Ohtani $2 million a year. You're not going to find him on a street corner with a tin cup because he makes like $50 million in endorsements, a lot of that coming from Japan. But they've deferred $680 million of this $700 million. And in the meantime, the merchandise sales, the possibility of drawing 4 million fans a year to Dodger Stadium, the increase in their broadcast rights, the appeal overseas for them. If you're the Cincinnati Reds, even if somehow they were bought by, some billionaire who just didn't care, he was a tremendous baseball fan. And so he just decides, I want to sign somebody for $700 million. He's just doing that because he's a baseball fan. He can't make it back. He can't make it back off baseball revenue, but the Dodgers can.
It's certainly been great for growing Major League Baseball's profile, especially the Shohei Ohtani impact on that team, growing it abroad. We saw the game in Japan. Yeah. Are you buying the conversation that inevitably comes up when a team like the Dodgers with a high payroll starts to take control like this, in the idea that it's quote unquote bad for baseball or bad for the league to have one team be able to buy their way to success like this?
Well, of course, the Mets have one of the highest payrolls, and in terms of individual wealth, Steve Cohen is supposedly the wealthiest baseball owner, and he poured a lot of money into it. He wasn't pinching pennies, and they didn't even make the playoffs. And the Yankees always have a high payroll. They've been in the World Series. They haven't won it, and they've only been in it one time since 2009. So it isn't enough just to have the money. The Dodgers have a very capable organization, top to bottom. And you have to have good management. You have to make sound decisions. But one thing that's always been true, if you've got a lot of money, you can swallow your mistakes. A team like the Brewers or the Rays in the very tough American League East didn't make the playoffs this year, but historically, they're always competitive. They exemplify kind of a modern Moneyball approach, but they can't afford to pay somebody $100 million and then eat it. Whereas the guys with the big money can sort of write off their mistakes.
So, Bob, the big question in baseball outside of the team aspect is AL MVP, Aaron Judge, Cal Raleigh.
It's almost a coin flip. if I had a vote, and as you guys know, it's only baseball writers who have a vote, broadcasters don't. I think I would give it, in fact, I know I would give it by the narrowest of margins to Judge, because outside of the homers, Judge has a significant edge in all the other, well, there it is. You guys just popped it up there. Significant edge, the RBIs, the homers and the RBIs. But even though Raleigh's OPS, which is the single stat that is most indicative of how productive a hitter is, even though 948 is great, 1.145 is, off the charts. And look at the batting average difference, almost 100 points or close to it. Now, you have to factor in that Raleigh is a catcher, and he caught like a huge percentage of games. He hardly took any games behind the plate off, and he's a Gold Glove catcher, not just a catcher. So that's something that has to be factored in. And very often, historically, when it comes to MVP voting, if a guy is perceived by many of the writers as having the year of his life, as opposed to somebody who seems to do it every year, they give that guy the edge. It might be informative to consider the fact that Hank Aaron won the MVP award once, and Willie Mays won it only twice. Now, for a whole generation, for the better part of 20 years, who are the two best players in the National League? Willie Mays and Hank Aaron. But somebody else had their best year, and somebody, Willie Mays hits 45 home runs every year. Let's give it to Maury Wills, Not that Maury Wills didn't have a good year, but he really wasn't Willie Mays. So I think that could work in Cal Raleigh's favor, where people will say, Raleigh's unlikely to do this again, and unless he gets hurt, Judge is going to do it again next year.